one thing would lead to another. So you'd have a tunnel vision, and then you'd be like, I'm not feeling so good. I feel a little dizzy. And then you'd feel a little twinge in your chest, and you're like, oh, I'm not really breathing. I'm like holding my breath. I'm not breathing. Wait, what was that pain? Oh, I think that could that possibly be a heart attack? Am I dying right now? What's happening? I think I'm dying right now. And then the spiral of thought starts going,
the downward spiral.
And until like you slow it down, like I didn't even know that was happening. It's just happening. You're not thinking these thoughts. It's just kind of happening behind the scenes, almost like in your subconscious, but it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I always related that hypersensitivity to, like, on the flip side, the very positive side of that hypersensitivity would be like a flow state.
Yes.
Like you're so in that zone.
In the zone. Yeah.
You know, you're playing.
Focused on whatever you're doing. Musicians, writers experience it.
Yeah. Basketball players, or like, I always think of Michael Jordan.
Sports,
you know.
yeah.
Recording from my studio here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a born and raised New Yorker, now living in the South. Welcome to Confessions of a Financial Advisor, the antidote to conventional financial independence wisdom. My name is Al. I've been a financial advisor for over 20 years. I've worked with thousands of clients in all areas of the country and from all walks of life. Through the relationships I had with these people, I've discovered the mindsets and behaviors that are most effective in a person's financial life, plus the pitfalls and all the BS to watch out for. The financial independence community today has completely lost its way, and I felt it was time to call out the FI gurus, podcasters, and self-proclaimed pundits. This podcast is not about the numbers. That's what all the other financial podcasts talk about. We will focus on the emotional and psychological components that drive our behavior. I am not looking for new clients, and I'm not interested in running for any kind of office. I'm going to tell you like it is from an insider's perspective and pull back the curtain on the financial industry. Now, let's get into Confessions of a Financial Advisor. Welcome to Confessions of a Financial Advisor, Episode 7, Panic Attack. I'm here with my partner in crime, Diane. Hi, Diane.
Hi, Al. Great to be here.
And we're going to talk about panic attacks today. And I know many of you out there probably have experienced one or know someone that has experienced one. And I thought it was a good idea to really explain how it works, what it feels like, just the pure sheer terror of a panic attack that is would be hard to understand if you haven't had one. Mm-hmm. The way it kind of started was I was doing a business presentation in New York City. I was a quote unquote small business owner where I was selling health insurance with a partner. We were walking around the streets of downtown Manhattan, going from office building to office building, and just knocking on doors of small businesses and asking them if they needed, a quote for their health insurance, if they wanted to compare, what they have.
Yeah, 100% commission, total sales dependent.
100% commission, yep. Walking around at whatever it was, 24, 25 years old, suit. Maybe it was 27 at this point. Full suit and tie in the middle of the summer, sweating through my suits in the summer, freezing my butt off in the winter, dress shoes, just wearing out dress shoes every few months.
Yeah.
Because you're just walking on pavement nonstop up and down stairs. Mm-hmm. And just knocking on those doors prospecting was terrifying. So we go into these buildings that were sometimes, 50, 60 floors. Mm-hmm. And so you'd go to one floor, there'd be, 15, 20 businesses on each floor. We just go floor to floor to floor, knock on the door. You never knew what you were walking into. Sometimes it was somebody slamming the door in your face, like, no solicitors, or what are you doing? You should get out of this building. Or, some people would be like, all right, come in, let me see if the CFO is here and can talk to you. Most of the time it was just dealing with like the secretary or the front desk person, the gatekeeper, and asking them for the business card of the decision maker,
the contact person. And
that was like the safe bet when you're walking into these buildings. I'm like, all right, let me just get a business card. I'm like, I almost don't even want to talk to anybody. Like, I don't want the confrontation. Just give me the business card. because it was safer to get a business card and then go back to our office the next day and place
I
the phone
imagine
call.
it's easier if you're going to get rejected to have it not happen in person.
Over the phone was a lot easier.
Phone.
Yeah, it's like, asking a girl on a date face-to-face or on Match.com. Which one feels better?
Exactly.
So doing that for a couple of years, we got some clients. It just never amounted to enough to really sustain us financially.
Mm-hmm.
So we were struggling. I mean, literally struggling. Like our big treat at the end of the week was like going to the local Irish pub and like having like a pint of beer, for $5. Like that was just living off nothing and commuting back and forth. So from Long Island to Manhattan, over an hour there, over an hour back. So it would be bus, Long Island Railroad, and then subway. And you had to do that on both ends. So fast forward to a business meeting I have. So I land one of these appointments, So
you're living this super stressful lifestyle in your career.
All buttoned up, suit and tie, just hating life. Yeah, just not enjoying life at all. I mean, you think New York City, maybe you have pictures of Sex in the City, or you have pictures of any movie you want to think of where people are just like out on the town and limousines.
Living the high life.
Glitz and nice restaurants. That was not me. Like I'd go in there, spend the whole day hoofing it, and then come home. I'd want to get out of there. Once the day was over, it was like, let's just go home, do this over again. So, you get a handful of appointments each week. And so on one of these appointments, I'm sitting in the conference room of the business. So we go into the office building, we're in their conference room, and I'm giving the presentation. I'm sitting down across from 3 or 4 people from their company, and right next to me is my business partner. And I'm just talking through it. I'm familiar with what I'm talking about. So I'm not stressed by the situation.
It's not a new presentation. It's one you've given a number of times before. So it wasn't anything out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I'm prepared. I don't have this fear because I'm not prepared or anything like that. And so I'm talking. All I remember is vision starts tunneling. Just things start becoming a little bit blurry. And my palms start sweating. I remember that. Like I'm touching my palms, they're sweating. And then my heart starts racing. And I'm like, what's inside? I'm like, what the hell is going on? But I'm talking this whole time. I'm going through the presentation. Heart starts beating faster. And then in a split second, a full wave of adrenaline hits me. And I literally jump up from my chair. In my mind, I thought I was like the biggest psychopath. And I thought everyone was going to be like sitting back in their chair with big eyeballs. Like, what the hell is this guy doing?
What's wrong with him?
Nobody reacted. I got up. I just literally started walking around. They're all sitting down. I'm literally walking around the table.
Doing laps around the conference table.
Talking and doing laps. And it's just, you're literally in the state of fight or flight. And we were talking earlier, I compared it to when you're falling back on your chair. And right at that point where you think you're going to fall back, but you catch yourself, that fear.
That on the edge. Because I think we've all done that.
Yeah, like, whoa, like, you know, that rush. Or like right when you're driving a car and you're not paying attention and then you look forward and you're about to hit that car and you slam on the brakes. That
narrowly miss an accident. Yep.
So it's that same feeling in that jolt of adrenaline, but just stretching it out so that you're just in that falling back on your chair moment for 5 minutes, sometimes
like
10
paralyzed.
Minutes.
Yeah.
Paralyzed. It's weird because you're still functioning, but your mind is just,
it's completely internal.
It's completely, it is. It really is completely internal. It's an internal experience. On the outside, my business partner, after when I explained to him what happened, he's like, I didn't even realize. I'm like, you didn't notice I got up and I was pacing around the conference room? He's like, nah, you look normal to me. I'm like, how is that possible?
Wow.
I felt like a crazy person.
And
I guess that's just part of my demeanor, to try to keep calm, cool, collected, right? No matter what. So from that point on, that was a bet. Like, so the actual panic attack itself is a really stressful, crazy experience. You feel like you just ran a marathon. You're exhausted. I can't even explain the exhaustion, but like, it's so taxing to your nervous system that you're just literally like want to go take a nap and just lie down.
Well, because it's physical. When your adrenaline internally, physiologically surges. And so when that's over and the threat has passed, your adrenaline levels come back to normal. And it's exhausting. There's a physically exhausting component to experiencing that survival mode.
Yeah, the stress just kind of just saps all of your energy. It's just so taxing on your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens after that? So that's bad enough to have like, it's one thing to have one of these things 10 minutes long. It's taxing. It was terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
If it was just over there, that would be great. You know,
like once and done.
Yeah. Like, oh, that happens. But what happens is you start to think about, it's called anticipatory anxiety. You start to think, what if that happens again?
Mm.
There was no real trigger to let me know that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you start thinking that, what if I go to another one of these business appointments and that happens? Or what if I'm in a movie theater or in church or wherever? I don't know, if you're in a supermarket or driving a car, God forbid.
Yeah.
In the middle of driving this vehicle, like this death machine, and you get a full-blown panic attack. Like, what do you do then?
Yeah, the sheer unpredictability of it. Like, the inability to...
Right. If somebody told you in 10 minutes you're going to have a panic attack, that would be a lot better than just walking around.
You put yourself in a safe space for a little bit and let it pass. However,
it doesn't really work that way.
Life doesn't usually work that way.
Life doesn't work that way either. Traumatic experience doesn't work that way.
The absurdity of life experience. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of the worst part of it, was that over and over, like you start thinking about it and thinking about it. And then I started reading up because what I do anytime something happens, when it came with the back pain that we talked about in a previous episode, panic attacks happen before the back pain. I would just start researching. I want to know everything about it. I want to understand everything. I want to know everybody that's gone through it, every technique they've used to get out of it.
Yeah.
And I went to a therapy session, and I remember my therapist saying to me, I kept asking him, I'm like, I really need to understand what's going on. I can't understand what's happening to me. Like, this is just happening and I don't understand why. And
what's the explanation for it? Give me a logical reason. Point me into black and white that's tangible, that will explain.
Yeah, if I just knew, then I could do something about this. If I understood, that would solve the problem. I correlated those two. If I understood, the problem solved.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, here's your explanation. It's because, you're Italian and you're from New York and you're 6 feet tall. Mm-hmm. That's the reason you had this panic attack. There you go. There's your clear-cut explanation. Now what? Now what are you going to do? And I remember thinking, I'm like, oh
crap.
He could have said anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as long as I believe that's the explanation, what am I going to do with that information? Is it useful in any way? I'm spending all my time trying to find the answer to this thing.
The root cause.
And maybe it just happened. My brain wouldn't allow me to think that, what if it just happened? It happened in that moment. Now let's figure out a way to prevent it or to deal with it if it does happen again, to, alleviate some of the suffering that's associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it just shifted my whole perspective. I went from, I have to understand why, to what am I going to, all right, what are some of the coping mechanisms? What are some of the strategies I can use to mitigate, some of this suffering? So I thought that was a really cool part of the experience. And if you ever asked me, what are some of the benefits you got out of like a traumatic experience, that shift of perspective was one of them. To know that I don't need to understand everything in order to have a solution to a problem.
And sometimes things are just not explainable. Like, there are things in life that just they defy explanation. And it's okay to not know why.
Yeah. I remember I had the same feeling when I got divorced too. I remember thinking to myself, like, why? Why did I get why? Why did this happen? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And then I came to the conclusion, I'm like, you're never going to know why this happened. It just happens. There's a million different variables that you can't piece together to make this perfect. This is the exact reason why it happened, because we piece these million different situations and moments. And so I kind of got away from that idea of understanding or thinking that I can possibly 100% understand.
Mm-hmm. So here's where I am. How do I go forward? How do I move forward?
It's hard to do that because my brain works. I want to know. I want to know why. Why did that happen? Why? How is that possible?
I guess to me, there's a form of resistance in some way to insist on asking those types of questions. Like, whether you want it to happen or didn't want it to happen, if it happened, you can't argue with that. Like, it happened.
and you want some kind of control. Like it's a control thing. Cause like if I know what happened, then I can control that situation.
Then I can prevent it from ever happening again to me or to anyone else.
It's rather than, again, letting go of like, there's nothing I can do about it. It already happens.
Mm-hmm.
I can't.
Where do I go from here?
Yeah. What's the path now? It's definitely a controlling thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what's funny is that's the part of what causes a panic attack, is that I think it was years and years of like rejection in that situation. It wasn't one moment, but it was a buildup.
Like cumulative effect.
Cumulative.
Yes.
You know, rejection and like sounds so depressing, self-loathing and sort of like just.
Well, we talked about this before we started recording, that panic attacks really are a form of self-assault. They are a form of assault, but you're the one beating yourself up.
You are, and you're not consciously doing it. It's not like you're telling yourself like, all right, it's time to kick your own ass. Like, yeah, it just comes up and like, there's nothing happening around you. Like nobody's hitting you. Nobody's yelling at you. Nobody's,
right.
You know, you're not getting needles jabbed in your arm. You're not in a stressful situation. You're not in a war zone.
Yeah.
But you feel like your nervous system feels like
the internal experience of it. Yeah.
You're just in that. Yeah, you're in
and trapped within your own mind, which I have told you, of all the places I could ever be trapped, my mind is probably the last on my list. Like that just sounds horrifying to me.
Yeah, it's the most narrowed of perspectives because like you're just inside. There's nothing outside of you. Like the whole world around you goes away and you're just in your world. You're in your tunnel. You're in your little tunnel vision worlds. The narrowness of perspective, the hypersensitivity to every physical sensation. This is all part of like how panic attacks work, at least for me. And I know from a lot of other people hearing their experiences, this hypersensitivity where, for instance, one thing would lead to another. So you'd have a tunnel vision and then you'd be like, I'm not feeling so good. I feel a little dizzy. And then you'd feel a little twinge in your chest and you're like, oh, I'm not really breathing. I'm like holding my breath. I'm not breathing. Wait, what was that pain? Oh, I think could that possibly be a heart attack? Am I dying right now? What's happening? I think I'm dying right now. And then the spiral of thought starts going.
The downward spiral.
And until like you slow it down, like I didn't even know that was happening. It's just happening. You're not thinking these thoughts. It's just kind of happening behind the scenes, almost like in your subconscious, but it's happening. And I always related that hypersensitivity to like, on the flip side, the very positive side of that hypersensitivity would be like a flow state.
Yes.
Like you're so in that zone.
In the zone. Yeah.
You know, you're playing.
Focused on whatever you're doing. Musicians, writers experience it.
Yeah. Basketball players or like, I always think of Michael Jordan,
sports,
or like chess players are in the zone.
Yes.
They're just like, they're not even like looking at the pieces. They're feeling it, you know, or like you said, musician is a great example. Like you're just literally feeling like where you are. You're not thinking about playing a scale or playing a certain note. You're in that music. You're inside
fully
the
present
music.
in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
man, the flip side.
The dark side. Wow.
The dark side of the flow state.
Like as good as flow will feel, panic attacks feel just as awful as the opposite.
There's that Czechoslovakian guy that supposedly invented the term flow. Csikszentmihalyi, that's his last name. I just know that part. Anyway, so he has a book called Flow.
Okay.
And that's kind of where I think the state of flow came from. But I've never heard it talked about on the negative side. Like you said, the dark side of flow. Dark side of flow
Light
is just
and dark. Yeah. You can't untie the two in life.
But in some weird way, it's like a flow state is like, it's not all engrossed in your head. It's almost like it's partly in your head, but it's partly ever expanding. Like you're just part of, I mean, it sounds silly and kind of, woo woo, but it's like you're part of everything. Like you're just like, you're literally in that moment. Like when you're playing music or you see somebody like really into the music and they're just like eyes are closed and they're in that music. Like they're part of the music.
Yeah. It doesn't sound crazy at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, it sounds a little new agey to me. Out there. So then you start to think like understanding is just irrelevance. Like understanding this stuff, like just because if you could map all the neurons that create,
if you could get it down to a single gene, even if you could, what are you going to do to change it?
Yeah.
It's happening. So, well, you also pointed out that you reflected back on some childhood experiences.
Right. So yeah, after 20 years removed from that first panic attack, you start to try to connect the dots a little bit.
Look back and
just see what the patterns were. Like, maybe not what directly led to this, but are there certain things I can remember from childhood that sort of made sense to kind of jumping off points that kind of led me to that panic attack? And I think at one time being 14, was in with 4 or 5 friends. We had a park, 14 or 15. And we're just hanging out. Me and my friends are hanging out. And out of nowhere, a group of, maybe 17, 18-year-olds just literally jumped us. And I was the first person to be hit. So somebody literally just lunged out. I didn't even see them coming. And I got punched in the face, big bloody lip, that whole thing. And I literally like ran off, just like we all tried to scatter. And I watched a couple of my friends really get like a beating. And they literally cracked my friend's windshield who was driving. And he had like his learner's permit, at the time. But it was a whole big deal. And like police came and we had to file police reports and our parents got involved and it was a whole thing. And part of the experience I didn't mention to you, which I think even further explains why like I kind of kept all of that kind of on the inside, was when I got home, I explained to my parents, I said, this happened and a guy came out and punched me and I was terrified, had fight or flight. I flew.
I ran. Yeah.
And my parents immediately said, like, you can't do that. Like, you can't leave your friends behind.
Wait. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they were like, you can't leave you always got to like be there and, stick it out with your friends. And I remember thinking at 14, 15, like so humiliated and emasculated from that, like just feeling like such a weak person.
Yeah.
And that like, I can't even defend myself. I can't defend my friends. I'm overcome with fear and I just run from, adversity. And like, this is who I like, then starting to believe that you're just this weak person.
Like intense feelings of shame.
And it kind of set me off on a weird path of entering like karate school. Like now I have to learn how to protect myself and like getting into fights at school and then like joining a wrestling team and just doing all these like physical things to like be more macho or be more, just be a tougher kid so I could protect by trying to build myself up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that carried on like until, pretty much until like that panic attack. I went all through college being a bouncer at a bar, beating up people, being fearful of being beaten up, being embarrassed. Like I was in this violent, aggressive world. A lot of things in between, the 14-year-old and 27 when, the panic attack happens. But like you start to realize like, oh, that's, like this kind of makes sense. Like, no, I can't connect the dots perfectly, but I see the trends.
Yeah. And
then there's nothing more embarrassing or emasculating than like not being able to make money as a man. I'm not able to produce.
Men are the producers and the providers culturally.
Terrible. So you're putting yourself in a stressful situation. You're not making money. The only reason I'm doing this whole cold calling, running around in a suit, trying to collect business cards, trying to sell health insurance is to make money and hopefully to make a lot of money. It's not happening. And it's that feeling of being 14 and being punched in the face and running away.
Yeah.
Just building, but I would hold it in and hold it in and hold it in. And I think it just kind of bubbled over.
Made itself known in a very vivid way.
And I don't think I've ever talked about this like in this way. I never like went from 14 to that moment, but I've thought about it. I've just never actually verbalized it to anyone. So.
I've been told often I just informally therapist people. So. I'm not a qualified therapist, however.
I'm not either. And I think the therapist in me recognizes the therapist in you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think so many people deal with stuff like this. I mean, I can only speak toward mostly men, and that I guess maybe it translates to some women, but in a different way. But for men, it's like being tough, not being weak.
Yeah.
Whether it comes to physical altercations, how aggressive you are. Then when you get older, it's making money. It's,
the car you drive, the title.
The wife you have, the house you have. Yeah. Trophy wives at 60 years old. So yeah, I don't know if it ever ends. I think a man's always in this kind of world where women's perspective on the same thing would be more of the nurturer.
Yeah, take care of everybody else.
Take care of everybody.
Not yourself, everybody else. Like you don't put yourself on your own list. Yeah, so women are conditioned to be nurturing and caregiving to everyone but themselves.
Right.
And then many of us, as you and I've talked about, we were at a certain point in life where it's like, I can't do this anymore. Like there's a brick wall of burnout. And I think women and men hit the same wall. We just approach it from different pathways. Like I got to a point where I'm like, I'm done taking care of everybody else. I need to do what I need to do for myself first.
Mm. And I've read other, like actually more women than men have panic attacks.
I could see that.
Statistically. And women's experience, mostly from what I've read, it's the same trend. It's being the caregiver and just being overwhelmed by it, that you're trying to take care of too much. And it's just like this never ending.
It's unsustainable.
And then that brings on this anxiety and then bam, panic attack. Like for me, it was like, I can't provide, bam, panic attack. Like,
yeah, I could see that.
But it's kind of similar because they're both a sense of overwhelm that you can't accomplish what you think you're supposed to.
Right. It's failing to live up to the cultural ideal. And then how does that reflect on you as a person? Like your worthiness as a human, like such crap that we feed our children as they grow up. It's ridiculous.
It is. And in so many ways, I thought my parents were good parents. So
they did the best that they could.
That wasn't a good moment. That wasn't a good moment on their part, in my opinion.
Not their finest work, but yeah.
But I mean, they did a lot of other good things, but why did they do that? You know, sometimes I went down that rabbit hole for a while. Why were they that way? If they just didn't do that, if they just like encouraged me, if they just nurtured, then I wouldn't have been going through all this. I'm like, there's no point to that. You're never going to realize.
I'm just going to suggest maybe they had their own messed up childhoods and life experiences.
Oh, that's a definite.
You know, it's like, let them off the hook. They did the best that they knew how to do. And that's all any of us can do.
Right.
Talk about unreasonable expectations.
Each generation gets a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
You abuse your kids, or you're like, a little bit less. Yeah.
A little less violent. The public violence is frowned upon now.
So tying all of this into some sort of finance-related concepts, very easy to relate these to. Panic attack. What do you do when, things start crumbling around you financially? What's the knee-jerk reaction? That I use that term so much with clients because it's so vivid to most people, knee-jerk.
Yeah.
So when I'm describing something to a client, I'll say, listen, I want to make sure you feel comfortable in what we do because I do not want you to have a knee-jerk reaction when things go bad. And eventually they will for a short period of time. And so I want to prevent that knee-jerk reaction. And for whatever reason, that terminology is people like, got it. I understand what you're saying.
It's visual.
Yeah, it's a visual. You're right. Like nobody wants to have a knee-jerk reaction. It's almost, it's negative too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Knee-jerk. So those conversations, I have to say it's the majority of what I talk about. The majority of what I talk about with clients is about not panicking when
protecting them from themselves.
Yes. And getting some sort of understanding and like forward thinking,
preventing them from assaulting themselves.
Yeah. Assaulting. Wow.
Look at that.
Man, you are a good therapist. Right.
I can't stop. So
I'm trying to get them in their own head and just, stop assaulting yourself. You're going to assault yourself in the future. I just want to mitigate that.
Well, it's that when you talk about the experience of panic attacks, that hyper focus and keep going narrower and narrower and narrower. Mm-hmm. And that what you have found, as we talked about, is that one of the lifelines that you can choose to grab onto is taking a deep breath and coming back to breathing and even just taking a half a step back to get a little bit more perspective than the hyper focus.
Yeah. And knowing the triggers, right? So knowing when it's coming. Although a panic attack, the first time it happens, usually is just completely out of nowhere. As time progresses, you start to feel the sensations that are leading. You see the path you're going down and you can kind of stop it at the pass. Mm-hmm. And you can do the same thing with, any type of investments or like the psychology behind investing in investments. Once you start believing that things are so bad, because things are never quite as bad as you think and they're not as good as you think. It's like there's always that middle road.
It's usually a lot more moderate than we would believe.
I think they say that about critique, like your critics, you're never as bad as you think, you're never as good as they tell you or something like that.
Yeah.
You're never as bad as they say you are and you're never as good as they say you are, supposedly. So you start thinking, how am I going to help them get ahead of this? because this is coming. So yeah, just
it's inevitable.
And you're painting the picture. This is going to happen. And when that day happens, I want you to remember this conversation. And it's funny. It's like I'll put notes in my system just to like document what I'm doing, just so I have like a track record of what I'm saying. And I'll go back to it sometimes with a client. I'll be like, we had this conversation a year ago.
At this time.
Yeah. And now the market's down 20%. I just want you to remember that conversation. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It does help. I mean, it's little things. Once somebody goes down that rabbit hole so far and they're convinced, and like you said, their focus is so narrow, there's nothing that's going to break them
They're
out of that.
They're not going to be convinced otherwise.
It's gone.
They're going to hurt themselves. And there's a point at which you have to step back and just put your hands up and realize there's nothing more you can do. You can't save them all. You can't save anyone but yourself.
Yeah, it's sad. I automatically thought that it only happens with people that just were less educated. It's so not the case. No. Sometimes it's the opposite. The more educated you are,
the more intellectual
you think because like now you think you're so smart.
Right.
And yeah, you're smart when it comes to analytics and, textbooks, but you're not smart when it comes to your emotions.
Yeah.
So now your emotions are driving everything in this, and you're just a slave to the emotion.
That's a crazy train right there.
Yeah. Crazy train. Yeah, it is. You could kind of like find the pattern from childhood to like 20s to 30s to 40s to like now dealing with people in your career. And there's like so many common threads and trends that you can see, that you can piece together. You can see it weave how the sausage is made, I guess.
Well, it's just fascinating, like how much we end up having in common as we navigate life experience. Like we really do, even men and women, like the details differ, but the life experiences have a lot more in common than we would initially think.
So much more. You could count them both as overwhelming, like a lack of control over your life. Like when you brought to that point when you're a woman and you're a caretaker and you want to take care of everybody. And then the reality hits is that that's impossible. Totally. But your brain keeps telling you like, but I have to. That's who I am. I'm the caretaker. I take care of everybody. That's going to come to a breaking point at some point. And with a man, it works the same way. So with a man, it's just a different lane. They're going down this lane of, I have to provide for everybody. I have to be the producer. I have to be the breadwinner, whatever you want to call it. The tough, the alpha male that takes care of the finances and beats away like the criminals. And I need to just protect my family and provide for them. They're both so similar.
They really are. Yeah.
And the same neurosis like comes from both of them, so like neither gender is immune to it.
No.
But you always think it's different. You always think that like we're so polar opposite, And
that's not actually the case. And the more that and that's why I'm so passionate about this project as well, because I recently discovered this year that I really enjoy ghostwriting and writing with men. I'm like, who knew? But it makes so much sense. Like I am very direct. And so men are a little generally more open to personalities like that. So I tend to work well with men.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
Because I'm a lot, especially for Southern men. Yeah, we don't.
Yeah, you had 2 pluses, direct and from New York. I mean, that's what I loved. Yeah.
Willing to have conversations with depth.
Well, I don't think men were ever allowed to speak like in these ways, that again, I tell you, if my dad ever heard this conversation, he'd be
horrified. He would not be a fan. Right?
Well, he honestly wouldn't understand it. Like, I don't think he would have turned off within the first 30 seconds. He would have like, I don't know what you're even talking about. I'm going to get back to watching soccer, or I don't know, or whatever he did. So like, it's just his generation and even generations after his, like, you weren't allowed to talk about stuff like this. I even felt that way as a child. Like I grew up with a certain group of friends that didn't talk in this kind of touchy-feely way. Contemplative, talk about emotions, talk about things that in our minds were only allowed to be talked about by women. And then I met another group of friends that were more contemplative, and like, it was so freeing as a kid, as a male, to be like, oh, I'm allowed to do this? Like, this is what I'm feeling. To be able
to relax and just be who you are? What a concept.
Yeah. And not have to put on this facade, this tough guy facade, and just talk about, sports and just things that mean nothing to me.
Competition and
Yeah. And fantasy football. Yeah. Well, that's our take on Panic Attack.
That was a good one. That was a very personal one.
It was so important to me after I had such a devastating feeling to know other people had it and have those other people explain it and then realize, oh, other people had this. Oh, and they've described it. Oh, I relate to those feelings. I had that same feeling. I'm not crazy.
Right. It's validating to receive someone else's story that has something that you personally experienced.
Yeah, it really felt good to do that. So that's our panic attack section. Hopefully it interrelates to our finance section of why people make wrong decisions at bad times. Well, what do we got on next week? So we have episode 7 next week.
Next week is episode 8, and it is Tesla.
Right. So this was episode 7. Episode 8, Tesla. That's a fun one. So I don't have a Tesla. And I'm going to preface this. I'm going to do this like throughout the podcasts as a disclaimer. I do not recommend Tesla stock to anybody. So this podcast is about me talking about what I know about the car, what I know about the owner, Elon Musk, the CEO. That's it. I don't recommend the stock. I don't want to convince anybody to buy it or think that it's
for entertainment purposes only.
Please, I beg of you. But that'll be a fun one to talk about.
Yeah. Well,
so I've read his autobiography and I've just followed him over the last 10 years.
I've got to put that book on my list to read too, because I would probably enjoy it.
You would. Yeah. It was definitely a fun one to read. Please follow us at faconfessions.com. Subscribe. We will send you an email every time we put out a new blog post or podcast episode. Hit the like button.
Share.
What else? Share. Maybe write a little review if you like what we said. You relate to something we're talking about. Leave us a message. But anyway, thanks, Diane.
Thanks, Al.
That was fun. We'll see you next week.